Well, I think the reason that I, at that point, became an environmentalist, because I was an accidental environmentalist.
That sounds like a good title for this whole
Okay.
oral history.
You could do that. It's your oral history. You can give it the title you would like to. There was a guy named George. He founded the National Welfare Rights Organization, and I can't remember his last name now. And he was a very, very influential social justice figure of that era. And he made a comment that had a big impression on me. He said, if it doesn't resonate with the American middle class, there's no point in talking about it. And I concluded that one of the things that was powerful about environmentalism in the 1970s was that it was a progressive issue which resonated across a very broad spectrum of the American public, that you could really imagine building an environmental majority in this country. So environmentalism looked to me like a very powerful lens through which to try to make the United States, broadly speaking, a more decent place. So I came to environmentalism through progressive politics, not the other way around. Most environmentalists became progressives because it turned out the conservatives wouldn't give them the time of day, so they'd become progressive. I actually became an environmentalist because I was progressive.
Oh, that's a really important point.
And what I did with what I thought environmentalism's importance was that you could build a political majority. And therefore, I was always pushing the political side of what you could do with environmentalism. I was never really particularly expert in any aspect of ecological science or toxicology or energy economics. I mean, all of the technical side of environmentalism, which is extremely important, was not my strong suit. My strong suit always was, okay, here's what you tell me the biologists say we need to do. Now, how do we put together the votes to get it done? So that really was my knitting. My knitting was how to take the science-based policy goals of the environmental movement and turn them into politically viable strategies. And the club was an extraordinarily good place to do that because it had a vast diversity of tools. We had publishing programs, we had outdoor activities, we had people in cities, we had people in rural areas, we had grassroots structures. Eventually, we had a political program, we had the media, the litigation. So we had the full toolkit. And so you could try different theories about what was needed to get Congress to act, to get the president to act, to get a state legislature to act. The other
It sounds like the political process was partly what grabbed you.
Well, the political process had always been what grabbed me, but the environmental movement's leverage on the political process and the Sierra Club's toolkit within the environmental movement were sort of very important. And the other thing that turned out to be, I think, very important in my longevity with the club is when I came to work for the club, the quote that was at the bottom of the letterhead was the Muir quote, when you try to pull one thing in the universe, you find it's hitched to everything else. And the club, and I think this was probably Brower's influence, but I can't tell you for sure. You might even know better. The club was unusually nimble in being willing to follow that advice. The club was willing to say, okay, we're trying to solve this problem over here, and it turns out, for example, in the mid-'80s, we were trying to deal with tropical deforestation. And one of the tools that we came up with was saying, okay, we will not allow tropical woods that have been forested in countries that have really bad forestry policies to be imported into Massachusetts. We actually got the state of Massachusetts to pass laws saying that Massachusetts could not buy wood from, it may have been Burma. And then that got preempted by these trade agreements. So all of a sudden, the Sierra Club found itself involved in trade agreements because trade agreements were getting in the way of our ability to protect forests. Most environmental organizations were much slower and more reluctant to follow those threads. And so I think one of the things that I appreciated about the club was that it had that exploratory spirit, going all the way back to Muir. But I suspect it was Brower who just got away from the notion that there was a fixed box that defined the environmental world and that you couldn't go outside that box. And most other organizations were much more cautious about exploring new things.